Hello, and how goes it? I'm Andrew, DM of the Dirty Rollers. Today's our first episode of our new monthly show, Cartalkraphers, where I make a map and shoot the shit with one of many crazy, talented, artistic, and creative people I am lucky enough to know. Our first guest of the show is a veteran of the TTRPG scene. He has credits in over half the currently published D&D 5e books and has worked on D&D since 3rd edition. Currently a part of Lazy DM's Forge of Foes Kickstarter project, and he's currently developing his own system called Core 20, right?
That's right.
Uh, he's a pretty busy guy, so I am honored and extremely thankful to welcome Scott Fitzgerald Gray to the show.
Hey,
So welcome in. Thank
thank you,
you.
man. Nice to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh,
Um,
appreciate the invite. Never too busy to just hang out and yak with people.
awesome. So I said a little bit about what you've done. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and let us know what you've been up to, go right ahead.
Oh, sure. Yeah. First thing you need to know is I'm really terrible at remembering things that I've done when I'm asked to talk about myself. So I'll just muddle through this as best I
It's
can.
understandable.
Um, yeah, I have pretty much the best job in the world. I'm a full-time freelance editor, designer, story editor, writer. I've been working in the RPG space since 2004, which is when I started freelancing for Wizards of the Coast. That was during the third edition era. Worked with them on a bunch of projects through third edition. Worked on a bunch of fourth edition stuff. Worked on a bunch of stuff through D&D Next. Worked on a bunch of fifth edition stuff, including being the editor for the Monster Manual, which was a pretty amazing experience.
Awesome.
Edited about half the Dungeon Master's Guide. Did proofreading on the Player's Handbook. Have worked on a bunch of 5e stuff since then. I think the last project I worked on, aside from some Adventures League stuff, was probably Fizban's Treasury of Dragons.
Excellent.
So that's a little while back. Um, but yeah, no, I've never worked at Wizards of the Coast, but I've been working for Wizards of the Coast freelance for 18 years now, and it's
Awesome.
been a pretty amazing. It's been a pretty amazing ride all that time.
Yeah. Hey, you got to see some. You got to see some things. You get to see
I have seen some. I have seen some stuff. Yeah.
third edition, 3.5,
Yeah, I
fourth.
started in 3.5. 2004 was, I think 3.5 had been out for, like, I guess, like a year at that point. So I started off, I read, I'd fallen out of D&D for a while. I started playing D&D back in high school, which for me was 1980, 1981.
Gotcha.
So I started playing with AD&D first edition. That was first edition that I played. First edition I read was the Holmes Blue Box, which was out about the same time. So I bought that, read that, never really played it because I found somebody who was playing AD&D already. So I kind of myself and some friends kind of gravitated towards them, and that was the start of our first play group. I got out of D&D for quite a while. I read second edition, but never really played it because my regular gaming group, which was all of my, some of my closest friends, kind of got busy at that point in time, and the idea of going out and making a new group didn't really appeal to me, and I was equally busy. Um, so I kind of skipped over second edition in terms of playing, got back into third edition, just as a fan, as a player, and then started working for Wizards and for other publishers in the sort of 3.5 in about 2004, early 2004.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You had well, I'll ask something that's interesting. You bring up the time when you were working there. So
Sure.
if you were there during 3.5 into transitioning into fourth, um,
Yeah.
what was that like? Because I know fourth edition. It's looked a little more fondly on today from what
Yeah.
I've seen, but
Sure. Yeah.
it was a little more like controversial when it not too long after it came out. So
Yeah. I wasn't on the inside for that. I worked on a lot of stuff through late 3.5. I was sort of off RPG stuff for a little while because I was writing a novel for Wizards of the Coast,
okay,
which unfortunately never got published. There was a few novels in the pipeline at the point in about, I think it must have been 2007 or 2008, when they shut down their fiction division at that point. So I wrote the novel. It was a really cool Ravenloft book
oh
because they had a
man,
really they had some really they had a really cool idea that they were working on for Ravenloft, where they wanted to do Ravenloft books that had connections to the real world. So
Okay.
not necessarily like characters from the different fantasy realms traveling to the domains of dread, but people from our world traveling to the domains of dread, which is a really cool concept, and it gave had lots of great inspiration and did some great stuff with the book that I worked on. So I didn't work on anything in fourth edition. I didn't work in any of the fourth edition core books. All of that stuff was all in house. As soon as fourth was announced, I started working on stuff. So I wrote one of the first fourth edition adventures, which appeared in Dungeon Magazine, the digital version of it
Okay.
that came online after fourth edition came out, which was a really cool little piece, which I based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which was also the inspiration for the film Apocalypse Now, as many people know.
Right. Right.
So that was fun. I worked on, I think I edited some of the first books to come out. There was a Forgotten Realms adventure that was published really early in the fourth edition run, Scepter Tower of Spellguard. I was the editor on that, edited a bunch of other adventures um, during the 4E era. These were the adventures that came out in like a cool kind of a folder packet. And you had one book for the DM and one book of art for the players and stuff like that. It was an interesting little package set up in terms of the production. So I worked on a bunch of those as an editor, did some writing for fourth edition as well. So it was an interesting time. I mean, fourth edition is a great game. It may not have been the great game that the third edition fan base wanted at that particular point in time,
Right.
right? It wasn't necessarily an effective or a smooth transition from one version to another. But as you say, I think people look back on it now with a little bit more fondness,
Yeah, and
and I think
people
people kind of appreciate it for what it was.
people trying it
Um,
out for the first time that
yeah,
have played 5e.
which is a fascinating idea. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the folks on the podcast was saying I was talking about their experience in playing fourth edition for the first time, and talking about one of the things that was interesting was playing it now on a digital on a VTT in a digital setup is works really, really well because fourth edition was very mechanically finicky, had lots of stuff to remember, lots of modifiers, lots of exceptions,
Hmm.
lots of if I do this first, then I get this bonus for a round kind of thing. Um, so that playing fourth edition today might actually be easier than playing it, back in the day when it was new. Just because playing it at the table, especially when you got into higher tier play, and especially as the edition kind of aged and you got more and more options and you had access to more and more class features and more powers, and it got harder to track what you were doing.
Right. All the
um
supplements and stuff that added to your
exactly,
characters.
yeah. So yeah, playing at the table was got tough for some people. Playing digitally now, which and giving you the opportunities that that gives you for resource management, not resources in terms of your character, but you the player managing the resources that make up your character, makes it a lot easier. So I think lots of folks who are playing 4E now are finding that it's a more interesting experience, and perhaps a smoother experience playing it with some digital backup, or at least with better digital tools than were available back in the day.
Right. I know when we were playing, because a lot of the abilities, it's been a little while since I played, but a lot of
Mhm.
the abilities and stuff, they almost felt like video game. Like you had it was so much more than just attack and you can do things differently on your attack. It was your attacks were largely different and did different things. So when we played, as a DM went through and took all the abilities, wrote them down on flashcards, and then gave the flashcards to players. That was their
Cool.
abilities. When they wanted to do their once per encounter ability, they could play it and then flip it upside down and set it off to the side.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
But yeah, the having the like Foundry, which is what we use a lot.
Yep,
Yeah, having something like Foundry, I could see make fourth edition um, a much different experience.
sure.
And something I've thought about fourth edition. If fourth edition wasn't a Dungeons and Dragons product, like if it wasn't going from 3.5 to what fourth edition was, and it was
Mhm.
labeled something else, do you think it would have done better without the expectations of being tied to D&D?
Um, just speaking just on a personal note, yeah, I think it probably would have. I think if the exact same game had been put out by a different publisher, I think it would have. I don't think it would have had the success fourth edition had, just because as the brand leader, as Dungeons and Dragons, the fourth edition got a certain amount of attention, and it got a certain number of people looking at it, and a certain number of people playing it, just because that's what happens when
Right.
Wizards puts a new game out. Um, I think if Wizards, I think possibly if Wizards had just had marketed it slightly differently, it might have been better. I think if there were fewer mechanical issues, because that was a problem with the game as well. As the game aged, some issues with the underlying math of the system kind of started to show themselves,
Right.
and it got to the point pretty quickly where you had to play with the errated version of the game, because if you were playing with the actual rules as they first came out, the game had sort of shifted to a place where the original rules weren't compatible with what the game had turned into anymore. And I know that was an issue for a lot of people. And again, playing at the table, playing with your books, if you've got your player's handbook and it's got like 150 post-it notes in it, marking, the things that have been errated, or the things that have been adjusted over time. That's a tough way to play sometimes.
Yeah.
Online, right? Much different experience. You just pop in, and the updates get made automatically, and it could practically be transparent to you, if that's how you wanted it.
Which is
Uh,
fantastic.
mhm.
As a online DM, having the rules updated for you is amazing.
Yeah, no, it's pretty sweet. I mean, every editor every editor knows the terror of having a book come out, and then finding spotting the issues that should have been fixed, the things that you don't see, right? There's an expression in most forms of publishing that a book is never finished; it's abandoned. You push the book to the point where you just have to get it out the door. You
Right.
simply have no more time to work on it, right? And there's always small stuff. There's typos, there's rules things that come out. There's something that you play test it 55 times, and you realize that if you'd done it 56 times, you would have come up with the one weird corner case where a rule doesn't quite work,
And
right? And so that's something that has to get fixed after the fact.
it's kind of something interesting to see with video games mostly these days, where everything has a day one patch because it wasn't
Sure.
finished on time or rushed out. But
Mhm.
something to think about, or something that I try to keep in mind, is that no matter how much you play test it in house, you're never gonna find everything that thousands of people playing it at the
Sure.
same
Oh,
time
absolutely. Yeah.
under
Yeah.
every circumstance you can imagine will
Yep.
ever be able to find. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, we live in a very different age than when I started playing the game. Like the original AD&D books, right? They had errata too, but you never saw the errata,
right.
right? You would have to hear about it from someone, and they would have to, point you in the direction of the one issue of Dragon magazine where the errata appeared, right? So you got to figure out how to get a copy of that, or find somebody who owns it so you can get a photocopy. People who didn't experience gaming in the pre-digital age or the pre-internet age, it's a completely different world, really. And it's just everybody kind of played their own isolated version of the game, right? Because everybody had their own house rules,
Oh
and there
yeah.
was no such thing as an online forum where you could exchange those rules with other people, right? Everybody was their own little island, and it was fun in that respect, because everybody got to play the game the way they wanted to play, and there was no real pressure to have to play it a particular way, or to worry about whether the rules had gone slightly out of sync with the intent of the game or not.
Oh yeah.
Um, but it's a different situation today, because if something doesn't work, or if something seems a little like if a particular spell or class option feels a little bit too sweet, or is a little bit underpowered, or doesn't connect, or has some weird thing that can happen in the game that breaks it, everybody's talking about that within a number of days, sometimes after something comes out, right? So the pressure to do errata quickly, the pressure to make fixes, and to make sure that you're, like, as a publisher, the pressure to make sure that the game is as close to right as it can always be, kind of on an ongoing basis, is really high.
Yeah. It's unfortunate a lot of the times. The people will read something before they get a chance to play it
Hmm.
and just tear into it, and
Yeah.
it's a kind of a part of like nerd culture as a whole that I find a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah.
Happens with the TTRPG stuff, happens in video games. God help you if you're a Star Wars fan. It's comics, it's everywhere, and
It's everywhere, yeah. No, for sure.
it's
Yeah, it's
frustrating.
another yeah, I mean, this is we're kinda going into the weeds as far as talking about the game, but yeah,
Yeah,
there's a much bigger kind of movement of culture that gaming has fallen into. I mean, the success of 5th edition, right? The success of D&D historically over many years, and the specific exceptional success of 5th edition in terms of the number of people playing the game, the number of people liking the game, the number of people beyond the player base who are aware of the game, right? Has pushed D&D into an area where it might not have been 10, 15 years ago, right? Where it's part of that discourse that comics and Star Wars and Star Trek and manga and anime kind of all fall into, right? It's become popular enough that people want to pay attention to it, and anytime people want to pay attention to something, there's an impetus sometimes if you want to talk about it to find something to talk about, even if what you can find to talk about isn't necessarily the best angle to approach for talking about something, if
right.
that makes any sense, right?
Yeah, just you want to be a part of the conversation
Yeah,
if you're
exactly.
even if you're not all the way into it.
Yeah. I mean, gaming's also strange as well. Like talking about like when a book comes out, and as you were saying, like you can have people, thousands of people looking at a book, thousands of people playing it. But even for all the people that are playing it, it still takes a certain amount of time to process what goes into a game and what you want to take out of it. And RPGs, to my mind, are absolutely unique um, insofar as that works because if a movie comes out, if a new series comes out, people watch it, people can comment on it. People can say, I liked it, I didn't like it. They can say it was good, it was bad, because of the following objective criteria. But the experience of watching something, the experience of reading something is effectively the same for everyone. And RPGs are not like that, right? RPGs are the one medium where what you get out of it is what you put into it, right? Like an adventure can come out, and lots of people read the adventures and the early reviews of adventures when they come out, are all written from with the understanding that this is the thoughts of someone who has read the adventure and has applied their own experiences as a player to it, but they have probably not played through the adventure yet because the
Right.
adventure's been out for a week, right? And that's a pretty fast pace to run an entire campaign if it's a big hardcover book.
Yeah, unless you've got a an absolutely hardcore dedicated group of players and a whole lot
Yeah,
of time
and
on your hands.
a whole lot of time and a whole lot of caffeine.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's tough to do that. Yeah, yeah. So it's it's RPGs are this weird kind of creative space where when you're working on something, like for me working as a designer, working as an editor who's, making other people's stuff as good as it can possibly be, there's this very visceral understanding that the stuff we work on is not finished, right? It'll be as finished as we can make it. It'll look good, it'll read good, but the product that we're selling is something that you get to take and turn into a story. We are not selling you a story like a TV series would, or like a film would, or
Right.
like a comic would, or like a novel would, right? We're not giving you the finished product. We're giving you a partially finished product that you then have to finish, right? And there's no other medium, there's no other type of creativity that I think is wholly like that. And that's one of the reasons that I love working in games. It's one of the things that got me into games in terms of, in terms of being a player, and the thing that's kept me gaming for all these years
Of course.
is just that idea that it's such a it it's a medium of creativity where the people consuming it are just as important as the people making it. And
Right.
I absolutely love that.
The story you're giving people the tools to make their stories.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, you see what we've got. We'll take a little detour, and I'll give you some easier ones here instead of getting too deep into everything again.
No, that's okay, man. That's good.
Um,
I'm just watching you play with this map here. It's fascinating.
yeah, this is part of the new update here. This is the skeletal plains biome. This is the one I was mentioning to you briefly when we were talking about what we could do. Um, I don't know everything that's in this. I haven't really gotten to play with it yet, but if you have an idea that you'd like to see me work on while we're talking and going over some stuff, you can
Sure.
toss it out because there's all kinds of things. These are all
Okay.
this menu here is all rooms that the AI assistant will try its best to lay out a room for you, and then I can go in and edit it and lay it out. But these pits are all different. These pits, you can draw out a little pit or canal or whatever, and it'll
Right.
autofill it. We have a blood pit in the middle of skeletal plains.
Very nice.
But if you have any idea of what you'd want to see or something we can work on while we talk here, I'll go
Yeah,
ahead
no.
and get
Pop
moving
some
on it.
around. For sure. Yeah. That's a cool setup. I like that.
Castles. We have crypts. You can throw a mansion in the middle of it. A nice little village.
Yeah.
Special. Oh, we can. You know what? Pop down a gingerbread house in the middle of the skeletal plains.
That's a
Or
massive gingerbread house, man.
yeah.
The
You know what?
gingerbread man that would live in that would do some serious damage.
It's got to be Fey, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with a gingerbread house in the middle of the skeletal plains, and we'll go from there. So, um, while I mess around on this,
Yeah.
you know what? I think you have you're currently working on a couple things, right? You have a Kickstarter
I'm
going.
working on a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a Kickstarter going right now. What's aside from the Kickstarter, I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, just lots of small stuff. I recently just finished work on a project for MCDM.
Okay.
I've done a fair bit of work for them over the last couple of years, which has been great. Lots of great folks there who I've known for some time and I've worked with elsewhere. Doing a little bit of editing for Arcadia, MCDM's magazine.
Awesome.
The big project I'm working on right now, which is probably going to be which is going to take up a big bunch of my focus, which has been taking up most of my focus the last few months, and which we've actually been working on, for the past year, even before we got the Kickstarter campaign ready. It's called the Lazy DM's Forge of Foes. If you know the Lazy DM moniker, you'll know this is a book that's being put out through Mike Shea's kind of uh, gaming presence, I guess. This is a project that we're doing as a partnership. It's Mike and I and Teos Abadia. Mike, if you know online, blogs as Sly Flourish. He's a great, really wonderful creator. Spends a lot of time focusing on helping DMs, run better games, run games more effectively. You can find him on Mastodon these days. Teos blogs as AlphaStream. He's been involved in the gaming scene for ages. Is the co-host of an amazing podcast called Mastering Dungeons. So the three of us have known each other for years. We first met when we were asked to work on a D&D Next project for Wizards of the Coast called Vault of the Dracolich,
Okay.
which was a cool little adventure. It was an organized play adventure that was intentionally set up to be run as a multi-table event. So the idea was you'd have like six different tables, six different DMs running six different groups of players through the same dungeon.
So this.
And as each of their stories kind of, fed into each other, you'd have one sort of main overseer kind of, keeping track of who was where and what was going on. And it was a great project to work on. We had a huge amount of fun, and we've kind of, we've been close ever since then. I've edited a lot of Mike's stuff. He's put out a number of books in his Lazy DM series, which are just books talking about how to be a more effective DM. How to get more out of your prep time. That's kind of Mike's main mantra.
Hmm.
And so we've been talking about a project to collaborate on. We previously 2 years ago, I guess now, had worked on a project called Fantastic Layers with James Introcaso, who's now the lead designer at MCDM, and that was a huge amount of fun. I love the collaborative nature of RPG work, and I especially love being able to work directly with people because that doesn't always happen when you're working on projects for bigger publishers. So Mike and I have been yakking about something, what our next project could be, or whether we wanted to do another project together. And Teos got involved in that conversation, and Forge of Foes is the result. And it's a book about monsters, but it's not a traditional bestiary. It's not a book with a bunch of monster stat blocks. Rather, it's a book that is filled with guidelines and advice and little short philosophical essays talking about how to create monsters and foes and villains for your game, how to modify them if you're working with existing stat blocks, how to customize them, and how to run them. So you can get sort of the best bang for your buck in terms of building really really cool encounters
Yeah,
around what a monster can do.
there was something in there when I watched your the video on the Kickstarter that really caught my attention. It was talking about how to take the abilities from like a list of abilities or from different monsters and easier
Mhm.
ways to plug them into something you're trying to homebrew or make up that fits
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
character.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, there's the book is just absolutely filled with so much cool stuff. And one of the best parts about working on the project is Mike, Teos, and I are all we're very different in terms of the kind of design that we like to do and sort of like our design sensibilities. So the breadth of the type of information, the type of advice that's in the book is so much greater than any one of us individually would have done on our own. We've been working on this, like I said, for a year, just sort of writing individual pieces of it and bouncing ideas off each other and workshopping stuff. And everything that we workshop is better as a result of the other two people, giving their input and looking at it from their own perspective. So, yeah, I think people are going to be very happy with it. If you go to the Kickstarter page, there's a free 30-page preview download that you can get, which features a number of finished sections from the book. So
Awesome.
this is stuff that, like, just like when the book comes out, you can take the stuff and you can use it as a DM, play around with it, see how it affects your game, have fun with it right now. It's not this isn't like a partial thing or bits and pieces that aren't a complete whole. This is all really cool samples of the kinds of stuff that the book talks about and the kind of approaches that the book lets you take as a GM wanting to have more fun with your monsters.
Excellent. I monster books and magic item books are
Yeah,
I'm a fiend for those.
me as
So
well.
I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to that.
really am. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I'm when I worked on the monster manual, we had a number of conversations, and one of the things that came up often was my idea, my kind of philosophy that a monster manual, a monster book is a reference book, but it only becomes a reference book the second time you read it. Because the first time you read it, a monster manual or like any other, monster codex, monster grimoire, there's so many cool monster books out there. Any monster book, the first time you read it is telling you a story,
Right.
right? It's telling you the story of what your games could feel like, what your games could look like. Because as you're reading through these monsters, as you're looking at their stats, their mechanics, the lore, as a DM, you're kind of imagining what your game could do with that, right? And for me, that's the best. That's the best part of a monster book. The For me, the Dungeon Master's Guide isn't the book that convinces a player to try being a DM, right? The Monster Manual is the book that convinces a player to try to be a DM. Because the first time as a player you read the Monster Manual, you think, there's so much cool stuff here that I could do,
Yeah.
right? And that's what gives you the push to actually try to do it, to try to run your games.
Is coming up with stories based on what you read in the monster manuals happen more than once. Uh, like,
Yeah,
I like personally like trying to find a monster that my group hasn't heard of or doesn't know about. Which
yeah,
uh, a couple of them, two of them are in chat tonight. Wedham and Buford. They are fiends for monsters and things, and they like looking it up. So it's kind of hard to find stuff that I can
yeah.
throw against them that they haven't seen. So
Well, that's yeah. Like one of the things that we talk about in Forge of Foes is that exact problem. Like whether it's players who are also running their own game, so they've got access to the same monster books that you do as a DM, or whether it's just you're playing with an experienced group of players, who've run multiple campaigns, they've fought monsters many times before, and the challenge of how to keep those same monsters fresh if you do have reasons to want to use them again, right? And the book has lots of advice about that. It talks very specifically about small things you can do to monsters to make them more interesting or to make them feel extremely fresh, right? So that you can, like, the first time one of these monsters shows up in an encounter, the characters and the players are going to be equally surprised by what's going on, right?
and it's yeah, like Lady Mostella was saying, and she's one of our mods. She's part of our group and everything. Um,
Yeah.
she So just looking through them's fun. I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times just going through, you see something and you're like, what is that?
Oh
And
yeah.
just seeing the picture of something that you've never seen before gets you to read it. I love it. I have more monster books and manuals and creature codexes and everything else, and I know what to do with. But
Oh yeah.
there are post-it notes all over for stuff I plan
Yeah.
on throwing. And but yeah, look what you're saying. You're giving us tools to make stories with.
Yeah.
Um, that's the best part, honestly.
It
When
really is. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I go. This is going way, way back when I first started playing D&D, which was AD&D First Edition. My friends and I grew up in a tiny, tiny little Western Canadian town. There's like 2,000 people living there. The closest reasonably large town was an hour away. Vancouver was 5 hours away, and that's where we had to when we started gaming. Driving to Vancouver was where you had to go to get your game stuff. We had no game store, we had no bookstore, right?
5 hour trip.
Yeah. And my friends and I were so generally broke at the time, and it was so hard to get books. We literally, myself and two other friends, we each had one of the core books,
Okay.
and we had to share them because that was what we had access to. So the first book I bought was the Monster Manual, and another friend of mine bought the Dungeon Master's Guide. Another friend of mine had the Player's Handbook, and we would literally just like swap them out every time we got together at school. Right? We'd say, "Hey, can I borrow this, for tonight, and take it home, read it, bring it back the next day," kind of thing. So the Monster Manual was literally the book I started with as a player and as a DM. That was the one that, because I owned it, that was the one that I read cover to cover.
I mean,
That was
that's
the
it.
one that I kind of dug into. That was the one that kind of, it primed my sense of, what kind of stories you can tell in D&D.
Arguably, that's probably the best one to start with. Uh, Maybe with the exception of the player's handbook, I could see, but the monster
Yeah.
manual as like the first book you get on a sharing books like that would be the best.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely had an impression on me for sure.
So, um,
It is quite the abode you're building
yeah, we're having fun with it. It's a
there. Yeah.
gingerbread house in the Delta Plains here. We had to have
Can
fun
you
with it.
can you put a gingerbread man, like one small enough to be eaten in the gingerbread house to get into weird philosophical questions about?
There is a cookie. Find it. Oh, yeah, there we go. Small, but we can do some trickery. Any of the Dungeon Alchemist uh, users that might be watching, embiggening trick fairly well. Everything in here has an upper and lower threshold.
Okay.
Not gonna let me put it in here. There we go. And you can break that threshold sometimes. Might not work because it. Nope, it's gonna work. Okay. You can place it on an object and expand the other object, and you can
Okay.
you can kind of break the threshold. Now we have a giant gingerbread man. Um,
Nice.
put him. The problem is we don't have a rotation, so we can kind of set him up on a chair for now. I
Mm.
can't stand him up in here, but
Okay.
um,
He's strictly a planar presence.
yeah, we'll leave him on the chair for now. But I'll find something to do with him. I'll figure it out. We could.
Cool.
We have these little green screen things. If I found a picture of like a threatening gingerbread man, we could put him up on the green screen and have him standing there.
Nice.
Pretty threatening. But across, um, actually no, I'm not gonna go there. You have one more big project that you're working on.
I have one more very big project that I'm working on.
I want you
Yeah,
to
I've
get to
been
that
I've
before we move on to some of the other questions there.
yeah, I've got a game coming out, that I've been working on for quite a while now. Not like working on it continuously for quite a while, but just something I've been dabbling with for some time.
Is it about
It's effective.
12 years, I
Yeah,
think?
about, yeah, 11 or 12 years, I think, is when it first started out as a set of house rules, and then it sort of, expanded a bit, and every time I kept going back and tinkering with it, and every time we started a new game, that we were using with which we were playing those house rules, I thought, I can add a little bit more to them, and I can make them a little more solid. It's basically D&D. It's a D20 based game. If you're familiar with any version of D&D from third edition on, you're going to know exactly what's going on with this game. But it's built around the idea of freeform character building with no classes and no levels.
Okay.
And the reason for this is because I've always wanted to play a version of D&D like that. And I waited for a long time expecting, somebody else, at some point will do this version of D&D and I'll be able to play it. And at some point just got tired of waiting because nobody seemed to be getting around to it. So
Just,
decided I should probably, mess around with it myself.
just do it myself then.
Um, yeah, basically, yeah. And it's been, yeah, I mean, it's not a game that that I expect will, replace D&D in any meaningful way. We're in a weird space right now. Like I was sort of thinking like in December, I'd kind of gotten to the point where I was like, I'm happy enough with the work that I've done on it now that I think I'm ready to, do like a full play test. I'd been doing sort of like an alpha play test just privately, so a number of people have seen the game, lots of folks have played the game. Everybody who's played the game seems to like it, which is a good thing for them, hopefully.
Yeah, that's always a good feeling.
Um, yeah, and then in December, I was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to do something." So December, like, I did my first thing. I said, "Hey, I've got this game coming out," publicly. I yacked about it on Twitter, and I set up a little design blog for it, just sort of talking about kind of what was going into it and thinking about some of the things that I'd done and why I'd done them and wanting to have a chance to talk about that. And then in January, the whole kind of OGL thing happened, and that's been resolved nicely. But we're in a weird space now where so many other people are talking about putting games out, right? So it's funny because I was thinking, hey, I'm going to be putting out a game this year, 2023. I wasn't expecting to be one of like six different people, six different companies
Right.
doing exactly the same sort of thing, right? So it's an interesting space to be coming out in right now. But
And navigating all the different new licenses coming out and everything.
yeah, well, the new license, I mean, it's I'm looking forward to seeing what Wizards does with the 3.5 SRD because the 3.5 SRD plays pretty heavily into the game. It borrows lots of stuff from 5th edition, but the original core of the game, which is called Core 20, because when I was first kind of thinking about it and first messing around with it, I was telling myself that the process that I was going through was kind of like taking the D20 system, which was like the heart of 3rd edition D&D, and kind of breaking it down to its core components, and then stripping it down and then putting it back together again in a slightly different way,
Hmm.
right? So that seemed like a reasonable moniker. Um, so the 3.5 SRD, they've talked about releasing that in Creative Commons as well, and I hope they do that because it means I'll be able to release the game using the Creative Commons versions of the SRDs, which I think I'm quite a big fan of what Creative Commons means for the future of third-party publishing.
Right.
People who are doing D&D compatible stuff. I think it was a really good and very bold move on Wizards' part, and I certainly applaud them for it. Definitely wish it had not come about the way that it did, but I think it's a good it's a generally good outcome to what was a pretty dicey situation for lots of folks for those weeks back at the beginning of the year.
And I'm glad that resolved, and it seems to be working out favorably for a lot of people. I'm hoping it
Mhm.
stays that way too.
I hope so too. Yeah, I mean, I think the future of RPGs is generally good. I think for I think there's so many cool games out there right now. There's just this huge. I don't know if there's a huge influx of players into the RPG space, but there's certainly a huge sense that people outside the RPG space are aware of the RPG space, and they're aware of it not as just like a weird kind of affectation or a geek hobby, but as just something that people do to have fun.
Right.
And that's certainly a big difference between the way things are now and the way things were, back in the 1980s, the 1990s. Even in the 3rd edition era, D&D was still something that other people did for most people in the world, right? It was still a game that was locked very firmly into this sense of what nerd culture and what geek culture is, right?
It's something that
And
we joke around a lot about now is all these people that want to play D&D and are getting into it now. Like, where were you guys? In the
yeah,
early 2000s, like middle
yeah.
90s. Where were you guys? That
Yeah,
would have
no,
been awesome.
for sure, yeah. I mean, to the credit of 5th edition, 5th edition, I think is, it's a good version of the game mechanically across the board, right? It does some really cool stuff, but it's the first edition of the game that really where the design intent, where the foundational sort of paradigm of it was, this is a game that we'd like people who are not gamers already to be able to play.
Right.
Because that was something that third edition and fourth edition, made no bones about the fact that they expected that if you were interested in playing this game, you were already interested in playing a game like this, right? And that was sort of the initial hurdle. And there's nothing wrong with that, as a design philosophy. There's many great games that kind of come out of that. You have to kind of assume that people have sort of a baseline knowledge of what it is they want to do to get the most out of a game sometimes. And fifth edition tried to push past that a little bit. It was really the first edition that did that, and I think it did that well enough that that's what we're seeing the benefits of that even now, 10 years later. As the game continues to be popular, continues to have a certain amount of weight in the social sphere and the cultural zeitgeist. I think all of that's ultimately good for the hobby.
For sure. And it's pulled a lot of people in that probably would have never tried it before, which is good to see. And
It
I
really
don't
is, yeah.
I don't know about on your end, but a lot of the people that I've seen try it are they're sticking around. They're enjoying it.
Yeah,
It's something they
yeah,
never would have done before. It's completely alien and foreign to them, and now
yeah,
they're picking it up and enjoying it, and asking, "All right, when do we play again?"
yeah. I think another thing that's changed as well is fantasy has really made more inroads into popular culture
Oh yeah,
than it did in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, certainly lots of things to thank for that. The Lord of the Rings films certainly were a huge push, I think, initially, because it was a specific view of fantasy, a specific type of fantasy that even as archetypal as it was, had a story that people could connect to. And I think that was a really important part of the process as well.
for
I think
sure.
the rise of streaming platforms, right? Um, the fact that suddenly, television wasn't in a strictly three network scenario, right? Where if a show was going to get made, it had to be made by one of these three groups of extremely wealthy, extremely conservative groups of companies,
Hmm.
right? So that certainly had a big impact as well. So yeah, I think living in a world where more people are engaging in fantasy fiction, both written and filmed, is one that's right for people to want to try fantasy games. And there's so many cool fantasy games out right now. I mean, D&D is still the big dog, but there's just the wealth and the breadth and the range of games that are out there, each of which has a slightly different way of expressing that core ideal of wanting to tell a heroic story and wanting to be part of that. I think it's pretty amazing, the place that we're at right now in
Are
terms
you
of the hobby and the industry both.
for playing, not for writing, but for playing? Um,
Mhm.
have you been able to enjoy any other systems lately?
I have not been able to enjoy any other systems lately. I'm kind of a forever DM in my own game, so
Right.
that's the main thing that I do. I don't have enough free time to do a lot of extra games. I really wish I did. It's a weird downside to doing what I do is I'm always working, and I'm very grateful for that. I mean, it's the problem every freelancer wants to have, literally, to never be short of work.
Right.
But as a result, the same problem that lots of freelancers have is your free time tends to be very kind of dear to you, right? And there's so many other things that I need to do in addition to gaming, that as a result, I don't do as much gaming and other systems as I would like to. I did the last before the pandemic. I was in a weekly game here in the town that I live in. The game that I run every week is online on Roll20, and we actually tried a bunch of systems. That we started out playing Pathfinder in that. We did some 5e for a
Nice.
while. We played Savage Worlds for a while, which I really enjoyed. We played Numenera for a little while, which
Hey,
is a really great game. I'd read Numenera when it first came out, loved it, but had never had a chance to play it. So it was really fun playing around with that. So yeah.
Savage Worlds is on our radar. Specifically the Deadlands Wild West.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've owned those books, have not played them.
we're gearing up for that. Um,
Cool.
Pathfinder, we did play Pathfinder. Actually, our group started with first edition Pathfinder, and then
Mhm.
worked our way into 5e or fourth edition in 5e. We've got Pathfinder second edition on deck as well. So it's unfortunate as this year's situation was. It is
Mhm.
like the extra little push to go out and try different stuff now that I am
Absolutely, yeah,
legitimately
yeah,
excited for.
yeah.
Um, we'll all have our 5e that we know and love and we're used to playing and used to building for. But yeah, like getting the extra push to get into Pathfinder and Deadlands and Starfinder. It's all been really fun. More monster books to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely,
So, you mentioned a couple things I want to go back to. So
yeah.
your core 20, um, you mentioned no classes. How do you have it set up if there's no classes to let me play what I want to play?
Um, yeah, that's the important question. I mean, one of the last things that I wrote for the game was the section on how to build your character, because all the time that we've been playing it just as a set of house rules and a set of loose chapters kind of coming together into something resembling like a player's handbook. It was we're playing with people who had already played the game, or who you could explain pretty quickly. Here's how this here's how this compares to the version of D&D that you're used to playing, right? Um, there's effectively, as it's set up right now, there's effectively three different ways you can build a character. The first way is the easiest way, and that is the idea that you can just use an archetypal build, right? Which is you have a list of what are well they're called feats within the context of the game. If you think of class features in D&D, right?
Hmm.
Everything that's a class feature in any version of D&D you've ever played, whether it's the rogue's sneak attack or a wizard's ability to cast spells, all of those things in Core 20 have been split off into feats, right? They're called feats just because I was, working with third edition originally at the time when I first started messing around with the system, and they were directly analogous to the feats in third edition, which are a little bit different than the feats in fifth edition in terms of their power level,
Right.
right? Um, you could think of them as features if the name feat feels a little bit off, as it does to lots of people who are playing 5e, because the topic of what feats do in 5e is a lively one still,
Yeah.
even 10 years after the games come out. But the idea is you've got this book filled with feats. You got this book filled with options, and you as a player get to choose which options you want your character to have. There's no specific path. There's no specific set of, okay, all of these features go together to make a fighter. All of these features go together to make a rogue. All of these features go together to make a spellcaster, right? It's just really like a process of just freeform choosing what you want to do and mixing and matching if that's what you want to do, right? The downside of that is it's difficult if you're playing this as a first game to know what you should be choosing from, because there's so many options. So there's two other options that lead into that, or that you can set it before that. One is the idea of playing what the system calls an archetypal build, which is just, it says when you're building a starting character, because a starting character starts out with 20 feat slots, right? Take these 20 feat slots, right? Or use your feat slots, I should say, to take these 20 feats. Okay. And the 20 feats that you take will build you into a specific type of character. And those specific types of characters are exactly the familiar archetypal builds that you get in every version of D&D. The warrior, the scoundrel is what we're calling the rogue type build. The arcanist is the arcane caster. So all the familiar options are there if that's what you want. It's easy to build one of those characters. It's easy to just basically look down the list of feats that you're taking. You note what bonuses they give you to specific things, and you're basically ready to play. Right. The second option is to look at the second section of the first chapter, which is building your character, which breaks feats down into packages, and it puts a certain number of feats together that all kind of work in concert with each other to build a particular type of character. So it's still fairly straightforward. You can look at the package. You can say, okay, I think I want to take the heavy fighter or the heavy weapon pack, right? Which gives you advantages with fighting with a great axe or a great sword.
Okay.
You might alternatively want to take like a sneaky fighter package, which is your rogue type build, which means you're more about uh, quick strikes and dexterity and sneak attack and that sort of thing, right? So that's a slightly more difficult, not more difficult. That's a slightly more complex process, but it's still really straightforward because you can have a very strong sense of kind of what kind of character you want to play, and you can just look through this, the couple of pages of options for feat packages, and you can say, I'm going to take this one, and that's going to cost me 3 feat slots. I'm taking this one, it's going to cost me 5 feat slots, and then you just go up until you get to 20.
And
Right?
that's what I was going to ask actually is you
Yeah,
said you have 20 slots, each
20 slots as a starting character. Yeah.
and each feat has a different cost depending on power level, I'm guessing.
Yes and no. One of the things that I worked on for quite a while with the game, just sort of trying to think about what sort of approach I wanted to take. Because I mean, the idea of doing freeform character building is not brand new. There have been great games, many games, that have been out forever that take a very similar sort of approach. But most of the games that have done that um, take a very sort of like a rigid mathematical approach to say, okay, if you're taking this, this is worth X. If you take something else, it's worth Y. So you have to decide which one is more valuable to you.
Hmm.
And the thing that I looked at, or the thing that really kind of jumped out at me playing third edition for as long as I did, was the idea that feats and class features in third edition were very, very regimented in terms of everything being worth roughly what everything else was worth, right? There are some differences. Spellcasting, for example, is one that, spellcasting has quite a bit of value to it because of the power level that it can bring to your character. So it had to be handled a little bit differently. But as a general rule, okay, getting a +1 bonus to attack rolls, okay, is worth roughly the same as getting a +2 bonus to damage rolls. This was something that was at sort of the core of third edition's combat setup, right? And it was actually talked about. I remember reading an article at some point where they were talking about the underlying math of the system and the testing that they'd done. And that same thing is kind of roughly equivalent to getting a 1d6 sneak attack die, right? Because you're looking at, okay, I've got 1 feat slot. If I spend it on a +1 to attack rolls, it makes me, that much more likely to hit with each of my attacks. If I spend it on this other feat, which gives me a +2 to my damage rolls with my weapon, then it means my damage will be, better each and every time. Or instead of getting like a +2 damage every attack, I can get a +3.5 because that's the average of a 1d6 sneak attack
Hmm.
on certain attacks, right? And so you're able to sort of look at the math of it and look at these options and say, yeah, these options are all basically the same. Now I just get to choose which one feels right for the kind of character concept I want to build. So for the most part, all the feats that you start out at cost 1 feat slot, right? If like 1 feat slot is just the space that a feat goes into effectively, right? Which hence the name. Certain feats though start to get more progressively expensive the more you take them. So it's not a matter of saying, okay, spell casting is much more valuable or much more powerful than getting a +1 with your weapon attacks. Therefore, the spell casting feat is going to cost 5 feat slots. What it is instead is a matter of we broke spellcasting down into different feats. So that in order to be a spellcaster, you need to take sort of like a selection of feats, each of each one of which gives you some aspect of what the overall spellcasting package brings to your character, right?
Okay.
So, for example, like if you want to build a spellcaster, the first feat you take is called Eldritch Spirit, and that's the feat that you take to actually let you channel magical power, right? You then take a feat called Spellcaster, which gives you access to spells of a certain type, either arcane spells or animus spells, as they're called in Core 20, which is clerical or divine spells in traditional D&D, or Druidess spells, which are the spells that druids cast. Right, so
Oh,
it's three spheres of magic.
oh,
Right.
we're gonna talk about that one too.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
yeah.
you
Um,
did something real fun in there, um,
oh, thank you.
that
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Right, so that gives you the access to spells. You then have to take a feat called Spell Power, which gives you the power to cast your spells. Core 20 uses a spell points system, not a spell slot system. It's pretty straightforward, though. It's not as clunky or as hard to use as a lot of spell point systems that have been tried in D&D. Because I mean, spell point systems for D&D as an alternate approach go back to the AD&D days. People were house ruling those sorts of systems, way back in the 80s, right? Um, yeah, but so like everything that you're going to start out as costs you 1 feat slot, but then as you go further, it gets more expensive to get better at something, right? So for example, there's a feat that's at the heart of the game called Weapon Focus. Weapon Focus is the feat that gives you a +1 to your attack rolls with your weapon. Okay. You can take Weapon Focus a grand total of 9 times. So the first time you take it, it costs you 1 feat slot. The second time you take it, it costs 1 feat slot. The third time you take it, it costs 1 feat slot. But then if you want to take it a fourth time, it costs you 2 feat slot, right? So it's
Okay.
like there are 3 tiers to the feat. And as you increase in tiers, it gets a little more expensive. And it's just built around the idea that, in real life, it takes a certain amount of effort to get good at something, right? So that's your first tier of feats, right? Your +1, your +2, your +3. It takes more effort to get better than that. Once you reach a certain level of aptitude, a certain level of skill and proficiency, you have to work a little bit harder to get even better, right? And then if you get up to the upper tier where you're getting like your +7 and your +8 and your +9 in your attacks, each of those costs you 3 feat slot, right? Indicating that to become the absolute best at something takes so much more effort than just being good or just being really good. You've got to push way beyond that in order to get that last, 10%, that last 5% of being as good as you can possibly be at something.
And at that point, you really have to focus in on it if you're spending the feat
Exactly.
points and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that that does, though, within the design of the game intentionally, and this has been borne out every we've been playing it for 10, 12 years now, is that as players, we want our characters to get cool stuff.
Yeah,
So
of course.
there are certain things where you say, I absolutely, want to pick up my 6th level of spell casting. So I'm going to, I've earned 1 feat slot. Sorry, I should say earning feat slots is what takes the place of experience in the game or leveling up, right? You earn feat slots as you're going through the game. You earn feat slots for doing adventuring, for doing exciting stuff, and putting your life on the line and throwing your character into danger. You also earn feat slots just for the passage of time if you're playing in a long-term campaign, one that runs for months or years, right? So each time you earn a new feat slot, you get to pick a new feat with that slot. So you might, for example, if you say, I absolutely want to get, my 4th level of spell casting. Um, tier at which the spell cast or the spell power feat will cost you 2 feat slots. You can say, okay, I've got this 1 feat slot. I'm just going to bank it. And when I earn my next feat slot, I will take both those feat slots and I'll trade them in for spell power times 4, right? The fourth time I take spell power. But in a lot of cases, what happens is as players, we don't want to wait.
Oh yeah.
So instead of one player saying, I'm absolutely just going to focus on my attacks. I'm going to be the best attacking fighter. I'm going to maximize my attack roll. I'm going to add that to the magic that I can put into my weapon. I'm just going to be, devastating on the battlefield in that way. It's a perfectly valid approach, and you can build lots of cool characters that way that kind of follow the same archetypal mold as the AD&D fighter or the 3rd edition fighter, right? Where attack bonus was your main class feature. But at some point, a lot of players look at it and go, you know what? I don't want to wait. So instead of banking, these next 2 feat slots or these next 3 feat slots, I'm going to take these feat slots and I'm going to do other stuff. I'm going to move sort of laterally into other things that can make me cool in combat, right? So I might decide to there's a feat in Core 20, which is analogous to sneak attack called Ruthless Attack. And Ruthless Attack lets you do the same sort of thing Sneak Attack does, except with heavy weapons. So it's boosting your damage when you have advantage on someone, when you're flanking, when you got the upper hand on your enemy, right? So it's a really good way to kind of customize your combat style, even if you want to play just a straight up fighter type, a straight up warrior, right? Every straight up warrior in the game is going to look entirely different because every character at some point gets built differently because every player at some point says, I'd really, there's so many, there are so many cool options here, right? I think I'd like to take one of those.
I think
Um,
with this what you're saying with the sneak attack, essentially with a heavy weapon, I think you caught Jay-Z in chat and at least him, but most likely
yeah,
Buford is all ears on this as well.
yeah,
That's right up their alley.
yeah. And again, it's just, the beauty of the system of taking something like 3rd edition which was built in a very different way as fifth edition. Like as soon as fifth edition came out, because I've been kind of playing and testing this for ages and just doing it as my own game and just having fun, right? And when fifth edition first came out, when D&D Next first came out, because I was working on some D&D Next stuff, my first thought was, this is great. I'll just take all these house rules I've got, because it was still like a very loose game at that point in time, and I'll just swing it over to 5e, right? And just carry on with what we've been doing. And as soon as I started working on Next and fifth edition, once it got into the late stage of the playtest, when the core setup of the game was kind of started to become fixed, was to realize that what I'm doing doesn't work with fifth edition at all, because fifth edition is built very, very differently than third edition. To its credit, like I said, I think fifth edition is arguably a better game mechanically. It's a much more robust game mechanically because of its bounded math, right? Because of the reduction of like in fifth edition, your fighters attack mod is their proficiency bonus, so it goes from +1 to +6, right? Or sorry, from +2 to +6. The in third edition, as in AD&D, your fighter's bonus went from +1 to +20 if you wanted to play that high, right? It was a straight linear progression, which made for really exciting but very math heavy encounters if you wanted to play past about 10th or 12th level, right? So what I did with Core 20 was to stick with the original math, because the third edition setup lent itself to the idea that you could split out these individual features, and each feature is roughly worth what the other feature is worth. They are all basically equivalent in terms of the benefit that they give you in a game, right? So a +1 bonus to attacks is basically the same as a +2 bonus to damage. A +2 bonus to damage all the time is roughly the same as a +3.5 bonus, every second attack or every third attack, right? And that kind of that level of consistency exists in third edition, and made it very, very easy to kind of strip third edition down and to play around with this idea and to do stuff that way. And once that was done, then it became very easy to take things like, looking at, hey, what if there was a version of sneak attack for heavier weapons? And what would that look like? And to crunch the numbers and to do the math and say, okay, this is what, this is how much it needs to do. And, this is when you should be able to take it in order to make it not a balance issue, to make sure that it's roughly equivalent to the other stuff that you could take instead.
So you had a player that absolutely loved that, right? Heavy weapon and sneak attack.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, most of the players I've ever had who've played heavy weapon fighters, they inevitably move towards ruthless attack, just because it's such a good option once you've got your attack mod up to a reasonable level, right? So
I mean, it sounds like it would be fantastic to you.
yeah, no, it is. It is. And the cool thing about Core 20, and this is the thing that sort of made me sort of the most interested when I was first kind of playing around with the idea of the game and seeing how it might sort of manifest itself. One of the things about D&D is it's really easy to optimize a character. I mean, and it's fun to optimize a character. I'm not knocking anybody who loves to do that, right? But it's easy to optimize characters because you can look at different classes and you can say, okay, this class has a clear advantage in this area, and this other class has a clear advantage in this other area. So I'm going to take 2 levels of this and 3 levels of that, and I'm going to take this feat which builds on that, right? And everything at some point you can focus in on what every class and what every option does best. And if you simply choose all the best options, then you are effectively building, a character who is sort of taking advantage of that aspect of the system, right?
And you also
One
hit a
of the things
point
about
where
Core 20, sorry, what was that?
I was gonna say you also hit a point where if you're really trying to optimize on something and you don't take a particular feat, then
Mhm.
you're not really optimizing.
Yes, this
That's
is yeah.
that's
That's
throwing
another
stones
downside
right
of
at Jay-Z here with his sharpshooter and great weapon fighter. Those are his bread and
Oh yeah,
butter.
nice. But like one of the things about Core 20, where you have to decide to take everything, right? Nothing comes to you for free, right? So like if you're playing a third edition fighter, your base attack bonus is automatic. You get it, right? Your saving throw mods are fixed, right? So you're good at some saving throws, you're not good at other ones. If you're playing a fifth edition character, same basic idea, right? Because in fifth edition, all characters have the same proficiency bonus. Then you get into, okay, so how is my fighter going to be better in combat than the rogue is, or better than a wizard or a cleric, right? In Core 20, because you're choosing everything, it's impossible to kind of to optimize a character the same way that you can optimize a character in other games. Now, I recognize that for some people that may be a drawback. Okay, for me, both as a player and as a DM, it fits a certain style of gaming that I really, really like, which is you have to make conscious choices about what you want to be good at.
Right.
Your character is never good at anything by accident, right? And it's interesting because one of the baseline decisions that you have to come up with, for example, is okay, if I'm investing feat slots in my attacks, in my combat skills, okay, whether that's like a heavy weapon fighter or an archer or what have you, right? If I'm selecting feats that make my attacks more effective, more potent, then what am I not selecting by doing that? And this has happened a number of times in games that I've run. Is people will focus on their combat because combat's really cool, and their saving throws don't go up as much as they otherwise should. Because saving throws, again, if you want to get a better bonus at a saving throw, that's something you have to invest a feat slot
Yeah,
in,
you have
right?
to be conscious of the opportunity cost for going full combat.
Exactly, yeah. And what inevitably happens, this is one of my favorite things, is people will sort of downplay or soft play their defensive stuff, and then at some point everybody gets fireballed, and everybody the next time boosts their reflex save,
The
right?
great
In order
equalizer.
to exactly, yeah. It's sort of like after the fact of realizing, oh yeah, I'm probably lower there than I should be, right? Um, Not just talking about sort of like that basic process of rebuilding or coming up with a familiar feeling character, right? One of the other things that's really cool about the game, because it is a completely freeform kind of setup, is you can do whatever kind of crossover characters you want to, right? Spellcasting is one obvious way to get access to magic, right? But there's another magic system within the game which is called getting a spell touched ability. Basically the same as what third edition used to call spell like abilities and what fifth edition calls innate spells.
Okay.
And it's the idea that if you want to spend a smaller number of feat slots, right? Because spellcasting is fairly expensive in terms of the number of feats you have to take in order to get the full range of spellcasting power. You can say, I'm just going to spend a couple of feat slots and I'm going to get a spell like ability. I'm going to get a spell that I can use innately 3 times a day, right? And you can come up with some really cool character concepts that way, like a rogue who can cast, clairvoyance, right, to see and hear what's on the other side of the door that they're trying to break into, right?
So,
Or who can cast, lesser dimension door, or the equivalent of Misty Step in our game. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's the same basic idea, right? So just being able to do that and saying this is my singular choice. I mean, there's lots of options in fifth edition for doing that sort of thing. Right? If you're a rogue, you can play the rogue and take the spellcasting build, that gives you access to certain things. But it's always a matter with D&D, and has been from the beginning, of saying, okay, I've got this cool character concept in mind, and I'm going to try to fit that concept into the existing framework of what this character class can do for me, right? In AD&D, which had no class options at all for the most part, it was often a matter of, okay, I'm going to play this fighter, and then I'm going to use magic items at some point, to let me do the cool stuff that I really want this character to be able to do. In third edition, it was prestige classes. In fifth edition, it's subclass, right? But it's always a matter still of sort of saying, okay, I think this is pretty close to what I want to do. And with Core 20, the whole point was to be able to say you should be able to build exactly the character you want to build. You should
okay.
be able to do anything you want to do. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it and figuring out how much it's going to cost you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking forward to getting a chance to play with it. I do want to let you know that
Yes.
you agreed to come on for an hour, and I don't want to keep you
Oh
way too
no, I'm
long or
good.
anything. So,
No, I've got I'm good for the full 2 hours. My voice starts to go sometimes when I'm talking a lot.
okay,
So I just wanted to, if it starts to go too much, I may bow out, but I'm good right now.
awesome, awesome. Thank you.
Staying hydrated and
Excellent. So the thing I wanted to talk to you about that
yes.
you had, I think it was one of your either your most recent, yeah, I think it's your most recent article.
Right.
Your article called "Going Wild," you talked
Oh
about
yes, the druid.
Druidist magic, and
Yeah.
there's a, you know what? I'll toss it on screen.
Oh sure.
This is a very interesting picture here. Is there a reason for that picture?
For the owl bear on an
Yeah,
article about druids wild shaping, I can't imagine why that. I must have just been an accident.
I wonder why.
This was the time everybody. I can't remember what the deal. Oh, the druid playtest. The the one D&D thing dropped, and everybody was talking about wild shape, right? And it's one of those things where there's one of the problems with trying to with a game like D&D with fifth edition and with one D&D, whatever the next edition is going to turn into, is that everybody has a different idea of how they would like to play a particular type of character, and you can't make everybody happy that way, right? Because everybody's going to be slightly disappointed because the final build for the druid or the ranger or the cleric or whoever is going to do a certain percentage of what they really would love a cleric to do, or a ranger or a rogue or a druid to do, and the rest of it they're going to have to figure out a way to make that happen,
Yeah,
right? So one of the big questions about should a druid be able to turn into an owlbear, right? It's a mechanical question on the one hand, because you should be able to say, okay, look, if a druid can turn into an animal of CRX, and if the owlbear is CRX, then mechanically there's no difference to the game if you just let the druid turn into that owlbear,
right.
right? But beyond that, you have to think about what's the narrative framework for making that happen. You know, like if we're going to do that, why does it work? How does it work? Is it like, should this be a subclass option? Right? The druids of druids of magic, or something, who have the ability to turn into monstrosities, or like some special thing that they do, something that makes them different than other druids, right? Is that going to be a subclass? Should that be a feat? Right? Like if somebody asked me to do that for fifth edition, those are the questions I'd be asking, right? And one of the reasons that I did Core 20 originally, the thing that kind of inspired the approach to the system, and my interest in experimenting with it, was thinking about, what if we didn't have to do that? What if we just sort of, by splitting everything down into its smallest components, and letting players freeform assemble these features in any way that they like, knowing that the structure of the game means that if you take any feature, its value is the same as any other feature, right? You're not optimizing, you're not min-maxing, you're simply making a choice saying, this is what I want my character to do, and what I want my character to be. Then there's nothing wrong with that, right? So the article there talks about the setup for the druid and the druid's wild shape, and there's two interesting things about that. I think one is that you don't have to be a spellcaster to be a wild shape druid. Okay, mastering druid-esque magic is a process of first taking the Eldritch Spirit feat for druid-esque magic. So that costs you one feat slot. Once you've done that, you can make choices about what you want to do. If you want to, you could play a character who just takes a spell-like ability, a spell-touched ability, right? You can build on Eldritch Spirit by saying, there's one spell that I absolutely want to be able to use, and I'm going to invest feat slots in order to do that. Okay. If you want to, you could be a full caster. You could say, I absolutely want to be like a traditional caster with access to the druid spell list. So I'm going to take the feats that let me cast spells, and I'm going to, get my spell casting druid on. But you can also, if you want to, take the wild shape feats, which are a different set of feats entirely, right? And wild shape isn't dependent on druidess casting. You don't have to be a spellcaster to be a wild shaper. If you're playing a druid, right, you don't have to wild shape if you don't want to. You can simply ignore those feats and never take them, right? If it doesn't fit your character concept to say, yeah, I'm a druid, but I absolutely, have no interest in turning into an animal. It doesn't really fit the vibe that I'm thinking about when I put this character together. You don't have to, right? You can just focus in on what you want. Now, within that framework of taking wild shape, and anybody who wants to have a look at the article, the little preview, is welcome to do so. One of the things that it does, which is a little bit different, is it starts off with the idea that you can actually start with you start off as a wild shaping druid specifically with forms that are less useful in combat. You start off with the smaller creatures, which are really cool for recon and for intelligence gathering. Okay, And for me, those have always been the most fun forms. Like anytime I'm running a game where there's a druid, I absolutely want the druid to say, somebody's chasing us. I'm going to go into hawk form, and I'm going to, fly up in the air, and I'm going to look around and see who's following us. Right? I enjoy that.
Yeah.
I love that. Right? And it's something that, for whatever reason, most versions of the druid's wild shaping have been afraid of. It's always like, oh, you can start off, playing a bear, who mauls. You can transform into a bear and maul people, right? But the idea of turning into, like a rat in order to, to sneak through this dungeon and kind of, see what's around the next corner, that's too game breaking for some reason, which has always struck me as odd. So the first thing it does is that, and then beyond that, it says, okay, that's the first feat that you take, and that gives you the wild shape ability, and you can transform into certain types of animals. If you want to get better at certain things, you simply take more feats. So there's a feat that lets you transform into larger animals. There's a feat that lets you transform into more powerful animals. And you don't have to take both of those at the same time. If you just want to say, I want to do larger animals, but I don't want to take those animals into combat. Okay, I want to transform into a horse at some point so I can, gallop away with my wounded comrade on my back,
We're going
right?
to be the party's
But I don't
transportation.
necessarily. Exactly, yeah, or like being a dog, right? So you can easily wander through a marketplace, right, and sort of gather intel on who's there, right? So and then, but one of the options is that if you want to transform into wondrous beasts, which is the category of creatures in Core 20 that an owlbear falls into, right? You take a feat for that. And when you take that feat, you get the ability to transform into wondrous beast, but you're still limited by the existing setup of how many other feats you've taken. So, for example, like if you want to transform into minor wondrous beasts, who are small and who aren't that powerful, then it doesn't cost you very much. If you do want to transform into an owlbear, then you say, okay, I'm also going to take this feat that lets me do larger creatures, and I'm going to take the other feat that lets me do more powerful creatures. But the whole point of the process is you get to make those decisions, right? You get to decide exactly what feels right for your character, and to build the character specifically around that idea, so that what you're doing is exactly what you want to do. You never end up with extra stuff that you don't want to do, like a character class that has a feature that you look at and go, yeah, this is kind of cool mechanically. I'm never going to use this in a game because it's not doesn't fit with my fighting style. It doesn't fit with the style of play. It doesn't fit with the type of campaign we're doing, right? Think about like a cleric, right? All clerics get the ability to turn undead. If you run a campaign with no undead, what are you doing with that,
Feels
right?
bad. And then you forget
Yeah,
you ever even have it if you never use it.
exactly. Yeah. So, if for example you wanted to run a cleric in a Core 20 campaign, and you knew that there was undead in the campaign, you would probably take the turn undead feat, and there are other feats that you can take after that build on that to make your turning more effective. But if the DM says, "Yeah, we're probably not fighting undead. This is a forest campaign, and it's very like a very kind of like a very Lord of the Rings vibe, right? Not a lot of aside from the ring race, not a lot of skeletons and such, kind of bopping around. You
Right.
can simply say, "Okay, I'm not going to take turn undead. I don't need it." Right. One of the other things about the game is that it allows you to rebuild your character fairly easily. Right within the rules is the idea that you can retrain any of the feats that you take. So if you take a feat and you realize it's not really what I want to do, or it doesn't fit my combat style anymore, you can lose that feat, get the feat slot back that you used to take it, and then take something else. And you do that in exactly the same way in exactly the same time frame as you take new feats when you earn feat slots from your adventures.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're not locked into something if you decide you don't like it anymore.
Absolutely not. No. There's also a rule right in the thing that says that like over and above that, like the idea is that like if you're going to rebuild your character, you can retrain feat slots reasonably slowly. Like say for example that you decided you'd invested a bunch of feat slots in a particular weapon that you want to use, and then you get a different weapon, right? You should be able to sort of retrain them slowly, but not all at once.
Hmm.
But there's another rule that which says that if you're in a situation where you've taken some feats that simply didn't work out. For example, like if you're playing a cleric and the DM thinks there's going to be undead, and so you take turn undead, but it turns out after 3 or 4 sessions that the campaign's going in a different direction and this feat is going to be totally useless to you, right? You can just lose it, just swap it out. You're not officially retraining it. You're just saying, okay, I'm going to pretend I never took it because I've never used it, and instead I had this other feat, which I will now take and make use of going forward.
Yeah, the flexibility there sounds awesome, and not being locked into something for a long term.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. It's a lot of fun. You
And
know,
then
it's sort of it's like I said, it's a version of the game I always wanted to play. I talk in I think the first piece that I wrote back in December when I was kind of yakking about wanting to do this and where it kind of came from. I mentioned like AD&D was my first RPG, but my second RPG was Traveler. And it
okay.
was a great contrast between the two because Traveler, as anyone who's played it knows, doesn't have character levels, doesn't have experience points. It basically lets you, you know, build your character mostly the way you want. Traveler's got that cool setup for when you build a character, you actually roll randomly to see what abilities you get, what features you get access to based on your career in the military, which is a hoot, especially because one of the options you can get during your career is to die during character creation. As anyone who's played Traveler loves to talk about.
Surprise, you're dead.
Um, yeah, but so it's sort of those two games kind of set the bar for me in terms of what I liked in RPGs because I loved both those games unreservedly. I liked A&D for the stories that it tells. I like the fantasy milieu. I like the I like the ability to adopt a heroic persona that D&D does better than many other games do, right? But I also liked Traveler for its sense that as your character advances, you simply get better at the stuff that you're good at, right? And you pick up new things that you're good at that you didn't have a chance to learn before. And so those two things melded together were sort of the game I always wanted to play, and that's what Core 20 sort of turned into when I started tooling around with it.
And then to kind of go back on something, so
Yes.
you're talking about a whole lot of really cool stuff, and I
Uh-huh.
know I have to ask some questions. I'm gonna try to guess what Lady Mostella wants to ask because she's our resident druid player.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so say she wanted to have some of the druid powers, and she really enjoys turning into things. And in fact, she is someone that does like to do the smaller like recon animals. She uses it quite a
Cool. Yeah.
bit. One of her
Yep.
favorite things to do is go into spider mode and go hang out on some
Nice.
ceilings and find what she can get into. Or
Yep.
she was looking for a wand that was given up a little cheaply, and she was going to try to get it back. Um, so say instead of a pure druid, she wanted to be maybe a fighter, but
Sure.
um, maybe in the course of her adventuring as a fighter, she takes a liking to the forest, gets tired of cities and everything,
Hmm.
and eventually, say, gets touched by wild magic of some kind, and she starts to gain the ability to turn into animals as a
Sure.
fighter.
Yep.
Um, you're saying that she could go bear mode as a fighter down the line if she wanted to, without having to be locked into everything else that a druid might normally typically entail.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's. I'm just. Oh, I'm gonna actually pull the rules up in front of me because I don't want to accidentally do something wrong here. But as far as I remember, that's basically that's a choice of 2 feet slots. Right. Sorry, just give me a second here. I just got
Oh,
to
you're right.
try to remember.
I gotta think of any questions to ask. And in fact, chat if you guys are wanting to know any specifics about the Core 20 system too. Um,
Yeah, anything at all.
feel free to ask.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull this up.
Well, what you're looking at, this is what I'm doing here is
Yeah, it's very cool.
this is a lot of the new system updates. This was the cave system. We have some tracks. The track system is I'm gonna have fun with the tracks. Uh, make a whole lot of uh, mine layouts.
Right.
Being able to go over the lava is an awesome touch. Jay Z wants to know if he can make a dwarf battle rager with banishment fists, and I think he means gauntlets. He wants to punch things into banishment.
This thing's into vanishment. The ability to take spell touched abilities is limited by how powerful the spell is, so I don't think banishment's going to fit in there.
Thank you.
Um, other things you could do though, yeah, absolutely. Like if you wanted, if you wanted to tie your combat style to the use of a particular spell, there are definitely options for doing that. You could there's the option for taking spell touched abilities. If you want to actually take some spell casting, there are options to combine options to combine your attacks with your weapon attacks with your spells as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe set off a kind of, probably not a fire bolt. I'd imagine it might be a little too powerful, but uh, maybe some kind of other spell effect on a hit or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of options. The game in general as well. This is sort of an aside to the rules. The system is a very high magic game. In
Excellent.
addition to the in addition to the setup of the rules, and which like the traditional setup of spell casting as it exists in D&D. There's not a the mechanics of how you become a spellcaster are different, but the process is once you become a spellcaster, the process is very much the same. It's the spells are all very recognizable from classic from other versions of D&D. But there's a lot of magic in the world. Magic items. It's expected that magic items are everywhere. It's expected that you have access to magic items. It's expected that you will buy magic items with the money that you earn as an adventurer, which is a departure from 5th edition for sure. Harkens back a little bit to what 3rd edition was doing, but uses a slightly different setup for magic so that you don't get into the problem 3rd edition had of everybody just ending up with so much magic that they didn't know what to do with it.
Just run
Because
out
the
of.
setup of yeah, the setup of magic is that when you're talking about magic items, most magic items don't last forever. They have a limited shelf life, right? So when you find a magic item, or if you buy a magic item, you know that at some point its magic is going to start to fade. And it's a kind of a fun process because it feeds into again that idea of what kind of story do you want to tell for your character. Because you get certain players who are like, okay, I found this sword and it served me well for a while, and now its magic is fading, so I'm just gonna get rid of it, or just when it ceases to be a magical sword, I will seek out another magical sword.
Right.
And you get other players who are like, this weapon means a lot to me now. I've been playing with it. It's become part of who I am. So as it starts to fail, I'm going to, like, instead of taking the money that I've earned adventuring and buy a new item, I'm going to have the magic in this item remagicked. I'm going to basically invest in keeping this weapon with me for as long as I possibly can. Right?
Oh,
Uh,
that's.
Um,
I like that idea.
yeah, it's a very different approach. I mean, it's one of the things which is different enough that lots of people who are familiar with D&D might look at this and go, hmm. And all I can say is that it plays really well. It's a huge amount of fun. Um, it's fun because I personally like games with lots of magic in them. I don't like games where magic sticks around forever, right? So this was a solution to that problem for me, and it took a few years of kind of playing to sort of figure out what approach I wanted to do it. It's been through a few different iterations before we've arrived at the current one, which seems to work pretty well, right? Um, it also lends itself to the idea that even as you're investing in your feats, which are making your like giving your character their kind of permanent mojo. These are the things your character does, the things your character is good at, right? Um, you can also look to magic to augment that, right? Potions and spell marks. Spell marks are the same idea as a potion, but it's like a little tile that you break instead of a vial of liquid that you drink, but they function exactly the same, right? Potions and spell marks are common, right? So you get access to those things, and you can use magic to kind of offset the things that your character may not be able to do, right? Because you've invested in one particular set of feats and not another. An obvious example is you can run a game where the party doesn't have a healer, not just like a dedicated or like a first tier healer, but no healer at all, because it's really easy to get access to healing magic, right?
Awesome.
Um, Healing magic works a little bit differently in the game as well, because one of the things that I don't like about D&D is that magical healing, if it gets too ubiquitous, and this was definitely a 3rd edition problem, where at some point your party invested in like a wand of cure serious wounds,
Hmm.
and every fight you just basically like line up and get healed, and then off we go again, right? So you can do that in core 20, but magical healing, there's a strange antipathy between magical healing and life magic, sort of like the magic of your spirit and your body, right? It's like its natural essence. So magical healing over time actually will chip away at your overall health. So every time you take magical healing, it heals you back up, but not quite to where you were before, and you can't get that back unless you do some long resting, like some downtime resting,
I
like
absolutely
like a
love
couple
that.
of weeks of stuff. Thank you,
As a
thank you.
That is an awesome idea. So, that actually that has an interesting effect too, because just by tinkering with the healing, um, you make the characters that might be a little more reckless by nature. Looks at Jay Z, who depend on that, like, oh, I'll just be fine after the fact. Um,
Yeah,
Makes them think about it, like double guess themselves of I'm just gonna run in, fist blazing as this battle rager would do, and
yeah.
just dive into combat with the usual expectation that I'll just be healed later, or I'll be healed mid fight, I'll be fine.
Yeah,
Um,
it's yeah, it's fun because it leads to interesting choices from players and characters. I mean, one of the core reasons that this system exists, one of the core things that I wanted to do with it, is to make a game that is more that is as focused as possible and as closely connected to the story of the game as it can possibly be, right? One of the issues about standard D&D is like we talked about earlier. If you've got a character concept in mind and you pick the closest class and subclass combo, but it doesn't quite fit, that kind of throws the story a little bit out of sync for me, right? So you have to sort of come up with reasons why your character, does this one thing, even though it's not really part of your core concept. It's just something that came along with the subclass, right? Um, the idea that everything in the game is a free choice means that everything you choose pushes your character in a slightly different direction, right? It pushes them in a pushes the overall story in a different direction. There's some stuff. One of the updates on the blog talks about some stuff that the game does with skill checks and attack rolls, where instead of making skill checks and attack rolls and saving throws a clear pass fail sort of thing, which has always been like a huge kind of a bugbear in D&D, right? Or the idea of, oh, I need a 15 to hit, I get a 14. Well, that does absolutely nothing. That was, I basically, if I'd gotten a one, it ultimately would have been the same effect, right?
right.
So there's a sliding scale of success, so that if you get just below the number you need to hit, you get a partial success. And the question of what partial success means is something that the player and the DM work out together, right? So everything you do in the game, you have the opportunity to kind of push the story, to push the scene, push the encounter in a slightly different direction, right? And really cool stuff happens as a result of that, I find.
That sounds awesome. Uh, yeah, I know there's a couple of them that are looking forward to trying this. So do you have a an idea of a window for when you're going to try to release Core 20? Or actually, how are you
Um,
releasing it? Is it going to be a Kickstarter or anything like that?
at some point, I'm going to kickstart it. Right now, I'm just looking at a playtest release, so people will get the whole rule set in terms of like what's in the player's guide. They'll get the whole rule set of what's in a book that I think is going to be called the Magic Grimoire. One of the things that I've been wrestling with, just because I love magic and the spell section is really robust and the magic item section is really robust, is trying to figure out whether one wants to take the traditional D&D approach and say, okay, we're going to put magic items in the GM's book, or to take the Pathfinder approach and say we're going to put magic items into the player's book. The problem with that is you look at the size of the Pathfinder books, and I think what I'd like to do is put them into two books.
Yeah.
So the player's guide has the rules for spell casting. The Magic Grimoire has the spells and has the magic items.
Okay.
And for a lot of characters, even if you're not playing a caster, the spells section is quite useful because you have access to those spells in the form of magic items, right? You can get potions and spell marks of spells up to a certain level. When that becomes sort of your workaday magic for a lot of characters. You can get access to other stuff in scrolls, even if you can't cast magic, even if you don't have a dedicated caster in your party, you can still activate scrolls and other items. If you're skilled enough in the magic skill group, right? Which is just like that's another feat that you take, represents your training in a specific area. Just like there's like the traditional skill setup, magic and stealth and persuasion and all that sort of stuff is all kind of there, right? And again, it's things you decide what you want your character to be good at, and you invest your feat slots in taking feats that make you good at those things.
Oh, that's awesome. Um, and I'm sorry, did you say like a timeline for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I want to get the playtest out as soon as I can. I'm working on it feverishly as much as my time permits. The problem, as I talked about way earlier, is I stay busy enough working on other people's stuff that I don't have as much time as I would like
Right.
to work on my own stuff.
And yeah, we
Which
do have.
again is, it's not a problem I'm ever going to complain about. But yeah, it's going really well. I'm working with some folks on just sort of beating a few sections into shape. What the playtest is going to look like, it's going to consist of the player's guide, okay, which is one of the what'll be the 4 books I think in the system. The Magic Grimoire, which is the other of the books, which has all the spells and all the magic items in it. Going to have a playtest set of monsters, so not the complete monster guide, but a really like a good robust set of, I think it's like 130 or something monsters. Same a little bit bigger probably than the size of the D&D Next playtest, the monster package that went out with D&D Next. And the monsters in this one will be slightly more developed than the D&D Next ones were, a lot of them. So it'll be everything that you need to play aside from the GM's book, which is nominally, I think, titled the Campaign Handbook. Because what I want to do, I think, with the GM's book is not make it about, like here's all the secret rules we didn't put in the player's guide, but just here's the stuff you need to know to run your campaign and to kind of, to look at the game from sort of the big picture level that a GM has to look at. Because the player's guide is set up intentionally so that it talks a lot about the GM's role, and it talks a lot about what the GM does. It gives a lot of advice about, how a GM will handle a certain situation, even as it's talking about that situation from the player's perspective, right? So most of what a GM needs to know is already in the player's guide, which is something that I've thought for many years would be a really, really good idea and a better way than presenting D&D than most editions of D&D have done.
It seems like it might be a slightly easier way of trying to convince some of the players to join the dark side and be a
Well,
DM too.
yeah, hopefully, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of explaining what the GM does and talking about the many ways that in the game, the GM and the players work together to sort of push the story forward. Because that's something that the player's guide talks about an awful lot. And I think doing that that setup, I think makes it really clear what the GM's role is, and I think makes it potentially easier for players to sort of get a sense that yeah, it's not that much harder. It involves more work than being a player, but not necessarily more daunting work. And there's lots of ways to run a game as a GM without sort of overwhelming and overloading yourself. And the campaign guide, when it exists, because that's one thing I haven't spent a lot of time on. I've got sort of bits and pieces of it written, but it's something I haven't worked on or focused on getting that finished. Just because I know that'll be the last thing to do, and I want to definitely for that one I want to bring more people in, and get more people writing sections on how to run games, because there's so many good people writing great advice on that I'd like to make use of that.
Oh, awesome. Um, I look forward to it. I look forward to seeing when it comes out.
Thank you.
And
I'd look forward to people's reactions to it. It's like I say, like it's been a lot of fun to work on. I really enjoy playing the game. I mean, it's different. It's a different game, even though it's built around D&D. Anybody who's ever played any version of D&D is going to recognize it. Absolutely, they're going to know what the game's about and what it does and how it's doing it. Right. Um, I think D&D is a game of archetypal fantasy, and for that reason, Core 20 does not intend. It's never going to compete with D&D, right? It's arguably not even going to compete with any of the 5th edition games that other folks are doing. I mean, there's Level Up, which is already out. There's Cobalt Press's Black Flag. I think Cubicle 7 is still talking about doing their own game, and all these games that are kind of built around the framework of 5e. I know they're all going to do cool stuff, right? There's so many cool, talented people working on them. It's absolutely inevitable that what they do is going to be good. The people that are working on 1D&D right now are the some of the best designers that have ever worked on D&D, in my opinion. So what they do is going to be really amazing. But D&D being an archetypal game at its heart means that you're always going to approach it first and foremost as, here are the archetypes that let you play a particular type of character. And that's the one thing that Core 20 does differently. And everything else that the game does sort of builds on that, or sort of was an extension of the style of play that allows you to do, right? So it's different, but just as much fun in different ways. And I'm hoping people will check it out, and certainly hoping lots of folks enjoy it.
Yeah, we'll be sure to spread the word. Absolutely, when it comes out,
Appreciate
or
it.
if you need
Yeah.
playtest people, we'll help spread the word for that
Oh
too.
yeah, yeah. No, once it's out, it's going to be like, just download the stuff, and here's some advice and some guidance. And at some point, I'll get a Discord up and running. I don't have a Discord server yet, but that's on the list of things to do. So that'll be the place to kind of hang out and
Let me tell you,
talk
it's
talk
fun to set one of those
talk
up.
feedback, and yeah.
So we covered your Kickstarter project. We've got your Core 20. Um,
Mhm.
we have about 15 minutes left. We're still gonna get to the giveaway. We're gonna do the giveaway at the end, guys. For the giveaway, you just have to be following the channel and you have to be present to win. That's it. You don't have to subscribe or anything. Just be a follower and be present. Um, and Scott, how about some not so heavy questions? Well,
Sure,
maybe not so heavy questions. It depends on how you look at them. Some of them might be a little bit, but maybe
okay,
some faster ones here.
sure.
So across your experience in D&D,
Yeah.
or just, it doesn't even have to be D&D. It can be any other systems you've played in your time. What is your go-to ancestry and class combo, or
Ooh,
alternatively, your favorite
yeah.
personal character?
Um, wow, my favorite personal characters are two of them, and those are two of the first characters I played with. Who, I mean, I haven't played them in a game for many, many years, but I wound up writing some short fiction about them, and actually some longer fiction as well, but hasn't stuff that's still sort of in progress. So those are two characters that kind of that are very close to my heart, because they both sort of spoke to a certain type of character that I wanted to play back then. They are, of course, extremely vanilla. One's a human fighter, one's a human wizard or magic user, as they were called back in the day, right? Um, Anybody who hasn't played AD&D, one of the things that's really interesting to talk about is how often your characters would die, and even if your characters didn't die, how often you would just kind of give up on them. Right? AD&D was really a game where you'd roll up a character, because it would take you 5 minutes to roll up a character, because the lack of class options and features and things you could choose to do were so limited. You'd roll up a character, you'd play that character, and if that character didn't die, you might just say, I'm going to roll up another one next time and see how that feels instead. So there was much less investment in characters when you created them, and you only got to invest in your characters as they survived, right? As they got on further, as you played like a few sessions with them and a few adventures, and they got slightly more powerful, so the chances of them dying instantly got lessened. Um, but those were the characters that you really got attached to, right? Because they were the ones that survived. They were the ones that kind of reached out to you in some way, right? So those first two characters are ones that I'm still quite fond of. Um, my go-to combination. That's an interesting question. I really love Rangers and I love Wizards. And I'm drawn to sort of the older slash vanilla ancestries and lineages. I don't have any problems playing humans. I love elves. I love half elves. Haven't played a lot of dwarves, and I think part of that is just they dwarves seem to sort of fit into a specific niche in a lot of games, and that's not a niche that I've ever felt the need to kind of tap into. But so yeah,
Now here's an important follow-up question. What are your thoughts
yes.
on goblins? How do you feel about goblins? Because
Oh, I love goblins. I
okay, good
love
answer.
goblins. Yeah, one of the things, gonna make this a Core 20 thing again. One of the things that Core 20 does with its lineages is the word that we're using in place of ancestry or species or other lesser words. Um, there are 12 humanoid lineages, and the 12 humanoid lineages basically are equal partners in the world as it exists. Each of them has their own culture, each of them has their own history, each of them sort of originated in different areas. the world, and the world as it exists, sort of in the state of the game, is one where it's a huge melting pot, and people have been working together, people have been living together. There's been limited conflict in recent years, and as a result of that, it's like a very sort of like an imaginary kind of Renaissance period, whether you're talking about the European Renaissance or in Asia. Those periods of sort of maximized trade and maximized cultural sharing, right? That's kind of the setup of it. So the game very, very clearly and very firmly moves away from the idea that certain lineages are inherently prone to violence, certain lineages are inherently evil, but it still builds in some of the classical archetypes of those lineages in the lineage features you can choose. Very briefly, because I know we're short on time, lineages are set up much the same way that your character choices are set up. You got a whole range of stuff, and you can pick and choose what you like, right?
Awesome.
So there's like 20 or so options, and I think you pick 8 of those. That's how you sort of build your lineage features, right? So like something like your dwarf stone cunning, your elf's bonus on enchantment, or bonus on saving throws against enchantment, their ability to not go unconscious. Those are things that you choose if you want to. So you can build an elf or a dwarf that's exactly like the standard D&D archetype, or you can build something that's entirely different. Totally up to you.
Awesome. We got we got the human ranger and wizard. Uh, Ranger doesn't get a whole lot of love, so that's
Yeah,
good to hear.
I don't know. I've always liked Rangers. Like even not outside the Lord of the Rings affectation. I like the idea of a character who's like a perpetual outsider.
Yeah,
Someone who is sort of not mainstream. They kind of do their own thing, and then they'll join up with other people working towards a common goal. Right. I like that archetype a lot.
awesome. So here's this one. This one might be a little bit longer.
Hmm.
But I guess it depends. I was interested in from your design experience specifically. Have you come up with anything, whether mechanically, a creature, an adventure, that you've got to witness, like maybe a playtest group uh, play with it and have a good time? Like, has there been anything like that where you got to see someone, or maybe even feedback? I guess because I guess seeing it might be a little bit harder. But have you gotten
Yeah.
some like awesome feedback that
Yeah. Lots of times, yeah. I mean, it's one of the awesome things about working with MCDM, Matt Colville's company, who do Arcadia, and they've done 2 big books, Kingdoms and Warfare and Strongholds and Followers. Previously, they got lots of other stuff coming in the pipeline. They're working on their own non-D&D RPG right now, which is really cool. One of the things about MCDM that they do really, really well is they they do a ton of playtesting. They've got an amazing playtest setup. They've got great people working there, great people running it. And so, if you're writing for Arcadia, which I've done a couple of times, one of the things that you get is feedback from the playtesters. It doesn't come directly through you; it'll come through the editor. But both the pieces that I've written for them, I've gotten great feedback. People saying the playtesters really enjoyed working with this stuff. It was 2 items of 2 articles of magic items, because magic items is something I absolutely love to write. I'll write magic items any day of the week.
oh yeah.
And in both those cases, yeah, it was some really cool stuff, and the feedback was, yeah, people really enjoyed this. And even though the feedback also comes with some mechanical stuff, like they weren't sure about this, or this seems like it was too overpowered, or somebody suggested that instead of doing A, this could do B, which is it's always good advice because it comes from people actually using it at the table, right? Um, just the general sense that you're doing something that people enjoy is always nice to get.
Oh, for sure. So before we get to the next one, then I will go ahead and start the giveaway, guys. The giveaway, all you have to do is do command or exclamation point giveaway to be entered. You can only enter once. You have to be present to win, and you have to be following the channel to win. So I'm gonna go ahead and start it. Hey, there we go. It's 5 minutes. Should take us right to the end of the episode here. Just go ahead and do exclamation point giveaway. and yeah, we'll go on with the next one in the meantime. Um, what's you actually probably have a few of these you could maybe pick from.
Mhm.
It's like a recent design choice or a mechanic that you've seen um, where made you sit back for a second, like, oh, that's pretty cool. I wish I thought of that.
Interesting. I like what Kobo Press is doing in Black Flag, separating ancestry and culture. I think there's, just I'm taking off my designer hat, putting on my player hat. I think there's more stuff they could do with that, and I'm just saying that as a player, I would like more options than that because I've kind of become obsessed with the idea of playing a version of D&D that has as many options as humanly possible.
Right.
Working on this game for as long as I have, but I like the idea that there's a discrete delineation between the things that are a part of your character because of their biology and the things that are part of your character because of where they've grown up, the area where they live, the family that they have, that kind of thing. I think that's a long overdue change. I think if one D&D adopted a process like that, I would applaud it because I think it's a really cool setup that works really well, and it's it's really good that Black Flag is doing it.
Awesome. Um, the All right, I'm trying to stay away from any questions that might take too long. Um, one I was curious though. If this goes too long, we can cut a little bit short. But has there been a project that you've worked on that really like stands out to you? Maybe not in terms of how successful it was, but
Mhm.
with the impact that it had on the players, either full players or play testers, or maybe
Mm.
on your design principles, like once it was done and released.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough, I'm fortunate enough that I can look at most of the stuff that I've worked on and say there's stuff in there that I'm really proud of. And there's stuff in there that I know has resonated with people. Sometimes it's stuff that I was responsible for or had a hand in. Sometimes it's just, that's the nature of the book, right? I mean, the monster manual, working on that and working on the Dungeon Master's Guide was a huge achievement, but what makes those books great does not has less to do with me than it has to do with the many other people who worked on them before I got to muck around with them. I can say, yeah, there's a few projects I worked really hard on Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. I was part of the editing team on that book, and that was a book that I was very proud to be a part of because I liked what the book was. The adventures in it and the setting information is great. It's really cool story and world building ideas. It's a collection of really unique and fun adventures to play. And I also liked the book for what it was. The idea of being a book, championing the work and the worldviews of people who hadn't worked in RPGs before
Yeah.
and who wouldn't have necessarily had that opportunity. It was a great book. The two leads on it, Ajit George and Wes Schneider, did an amazing job of putting that team together and of creating a framework that I got to then come in and try to make already great writing as great as it could possibly be. So that was really cool. Um, Probably the one project that I worked on that was the most interesting from a perspective of I'd never worked on anything like it before, and I had no idea how it was going to turn out was the adventure Dead in Thay, which was
Huh.
originally a D&D Next adventure and then got rolled into Tales from the Yawning Portal. And it's a massive mega dungeon, and I love mega dungeons, and so I was ecstatic to be asked to work on it, to write it. That was a project I did as a designer, not as an editor. And I had so much fun with it, right? And it was such a fun process, sort of figuring out, okay, how can something on this scale work, and how is it going to work as a multi-table event? Because the original D&D Next version was like Vault of the Draculich, which I mentioned earlier, an adventure where multiple tables would be playing at the same time over multiple weeks, which made it even more complicated than Vault of the Draculich, right? So yeah, that was huge. That was a great fun to work on. I came up with a lot of cool ideas for that I'm still pretty proud of. And it was, and everybody, people who have played it, everybody seems to really like what's in there. So that's pretty gratifying.
All right. So Garen won the giveaway. Congrats, Garen. Um, and your Dead and Thay thing,
Mhm.
I could honestly pick your brain about that for a long time because
Yeah,
it's
that's
something on
great.
my my topics I was going to ask about, but I think it might take a while. But I
Sure.
guess I'll let me stop. Whoops, sorry, Twisted. That should not have popped up again. That should be done. That was Garen winning. Hopefully that stopped it. So still relatively new to streaming and learning things. So I will go ahead and get rid of. Actually, Lady Mistell, if you can get rid of that second one, I'd appreciate it. Um, but the Dead and They thing, was that originally designed? I think you might have just mentioned it, but was it originally designed to be run with like four different groups,
Yeah, I
all
think it was
going
I think
through
it
it?
was yeah, I think it was 6 different groups originally. If I would have to grab a copy and check it out. But yeah, yeah, it was designed as a multi-table, open. It wasn't Adventures League back then because they weren't calling it they weren't calling it that. But it was designed as a multi-table multi-week event. So basically, you'd come in with your party. Each DM would work through different sections of the dungeon, which is why it was sort of compartmentalized and set up the way that it was. And there'd be like an overseer who kind of tracked every group's progress, and groups could share resources in different ways sometimes. And then the whole idea was at some point they pushed toward an ending, which was like a big thing where everybody was fighting in the same area. Like all the different groups kind of came together, all these disparate heroes who'd been sort of working on their own, taking out this Thayan enclave. It was a lot of fun.
That's because I feel like it would be a massive undertaking, but I've had the thought.
Yeah,
I've been brewing this one for a little while, and then getting the chance to talk to you, I figured it was the perfect time to bring it up.
sure.
Um, I've thought about when the games that I've run slim down and I can pick up a few more. I have seriously considered getting a handful of groups together and having them all go through Dead and Thay and
Cool.
starting them out. And I think I don't have it yet. I've read a little bit about it. I need it's in you said Yawning Portal. I need to pick
Yeah,
that
it's
up.
one of the adventures in yeah, it's one of the adventures in that book.
Yeah, I do need to pick that up and actually read through the whole thing. But from what I know about it, just reading about it online is a recommended dungeon, and what it was for and everything. And I've thought about sticking multiple groups in there, setting them up in different areas, and seeing how many of them survive and what they can do.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
It's something that, yeah, I've definitely considered doing. How long? It's probably been a little while since you've worked on it, so if you don't know the answer to this, it's fine. But how long is it expected to take um, groups to get through there?
It's really hard to say. I mean, there's two different versions of it. There's the D&D Next version, which is going to be like the rules are going to be a little bit out of whack
Hmm.
if you're playing 5e right now. That was the multi-table event, right? So it's set up very specifically to be played by different groups, right? The version that's in Dead of Thay was edited and redeveloped so that it can be played as a single, like with a single group, right? So it makes some changes to the setup, and there's some changes to the internal logic of how a group can spend as much time as they need to go through this big dungeon without everybody in the dungeon kind of jumping on them at the same time, right? I know that Mike Shea also at one point did a book of advice for running Dead and Thay for a single table, which might still be relevant. It's one of his many blog articles. So if you just Google Sly Flourish Dead and Thay, I'm sure it'll turn up somewhere.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know the exact answer to that. If I'm remembering, no, I don't even remember how many weeks the campaign was supposed to run. I was thinking you could just find out how many weeks it ran and then just multiply that by the number of tables, but just to get a rough idea. But I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. When I saw how like that was the reason that was up there is to run multiple people or multiple parties through it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's neat. That's interesting. And
Hmm.
I, of course, didn't find out about it until last year. I missed it. So, yeah, I'm late to the party, uh,
That's okay.
um, but yeah, Garen, if you're sure, then we can give it to Twisted. That was my fault for the contest messing up. Let me get in touch with both of you guys afterwards. I can DM both of you. Um, Scott, I don't want to keep you too long. I I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and talking with me and
Oh, no worries.
giving us a ton of insight into design stuff and things that you've done. And you've got me hyped for Core 20 to try it out.
Oh, I'm glad.
I know Jay Z's pretty
One
pumped.
one down.
Yeah, you got a few of us. Honestly, I'm looking forward to to playing. I don't know, a wild shaping rogue because I tend to gravitate towards
Yeah,
rogues. So
yeah, like a wild shaping rogue who specializes just in like urban animals. And that's their whole shtick,
Pizza
their
Rat the
mo.
Rogue incoming.
Yeah, absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
but thank you so much for coming on. You want to give let everybody know where they can find you? We do have it in our in
Oh
chat
yeah, for
here.
sure. Yeah, no, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Dice.camp Mastodon as Scott F. Gray. So same name in both places. My main website, which is sporadically updated and often out of date, is insaneangel.com. And if you're interested in Core 20, the Core 20 development blog has some stuff on it, just talking about different aspects of the game. And I will continue to throw some stuff up there as I can find time. And that's at core20rpg.com.
Awesome. And I don't want anybody to forget the Kickstarter, which you remember what that is off the top of your head? That's a
Forge of
long
Foes,
one.
yeah, that's a long one. Yeah, just if you just Google Kickstarter Forge of Foes,
Oh
it'll
no, that
take
was
you
just
right
me
to it.
testing you, Scott.
Oh,
That's
you tested?
yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna to expect you to remember the whole thing. It's the link is in chat though for that. So
Yeah, yeah,
everybody,
yeah.
make
We're
sure you
thinking. I
check
think
that
we're.
out.
Yeah, I think we're just under 2 weeks left. So if you lots of time to check it out, check out the preview if nothing else. Like if you just there's some really cool stuff in the preview. If you're running 5e, I'd be very surprised if you don't find something in the preview that you look at and go, this is kind of cool, and this could I can use this in my game
Yeah,
because there's so much cool stuff in there.
just the write up for it was just intriguing. And again, it's a monster book, so you've already
Yeah,
kind of got me hooked by default. Or not
yeah.
necessarily a monster book. I don't want to misadvertise it, but it's a book for making more monsters and customizing
Yeah,
monsters.
it's a book. It's a book for DMs who love monsters and who want to do cool stuff with their monsters.
Awesome.
Especially like yeah, like a lot of the advice in there talks about how to make your existing monsters, like monsters in your existing books, the monster manual, Cobalt Presses books, any of the options that are out there, how to make them more interesting. How to take cool stuff that all the various companies that are doing monster books are doing, and how to make that even more fun for your own game. So
Awesome. All
all
right.
good stuff.
Well, thanks again, Scott. I
No
appreciate you
problem.
coming
Thank
on.
you. Oh, I much appreciate the invitation. Thanks. Thanks to everybody in the chat for hanging out and listening to me ramble on. Much appreciated.
You have anything else you want to say? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and end it there. And you guys all have a good weekend. Um, Friday, it's St. Patty's Day, so be safe if you plan on drinking or doing anything tonight. But yeah, otherwise, I think that's it. Guys, have a good night.
All right.
Thanks for watching. Scott, you take care, and we'll see all you guys next time.
All right.
Adios.